literatura es un arte que nos permite comunicarnos, pero nos permite comunicarnos también a través de las culturas. Hemos visto también una literatura del exilio, la hemos conocido aquí en México con el exilio de los republicanos españoles, y la hemos visto también en estos últimos años, por ejemplo, con autores en Inglaterra que provienen de otros mundos, de otras tierras, así como antes iban los autores de Europa, África, por ejemplo. Hoy vemos que hay una literatura también que tiene raíces africanas, pero que se hace en el mundo europeo, por ejemplo, en Inglaterra. Es el caso de Abdulrazak Gurnah. Él nació en Zanzíbar el 20 de diciembre de 1948. Su lengua materna, el kiswahili. Yo acabo de entender que así se pronuncia kiswahili, a pesar de que se escribe swahili. Abdulrazak Gurnah ganó el Premio Nobel de Literatura en 2021. Tiene obras, me parece, muy importantes, obras que vale la pena leer, como Paraíso y Desertion, que aquí en el mundo español se está distribuyendo con el título El desertor. Vamos a conversar en inglés para que pueda usted escuchar directamente a nuestro autor y tendremos subtítulos en español. Mr. Gurnah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this conversation. Your literature has been described as a literature of colonialism, because you dwell on colonialism. You actually write about many things happening in Africa, but at a time when Europeans were beginning to live in Africa, and they were changing the culture of Africa as well. Is your literature a reflection on colonialism?
Well, it's a reflection on colonialism, but that's not the only thing that it is. I have in fact written, or published rather, should I say, 10 books.
Yes.
The two that you have in front of you are
Desertion and Paradise.
So they're kind of historical in a sense of being set at an earlier period, mostly at a period around about the beginning of the 20th century. But the other books are not historical in that way, so it's not the only subject I write about. But that's the one that the Swedish Academy highlighted in the citation.
What would you have highlighted in your citation? Would you have done it differently?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm not going to argue with the Swedish Academy.
Okay.
And what they say is not untrue. It's true, but it's kind of like there are other sides to what I do as well. What is that? I'll preempt the question that you're going to ask me. What are those other things then? I'd say, for example, I'm very interested in the family and how it seems to me, in almost any culture, the family is a kind of core community, if you like, and kind of replicated in a sort of a widening circle, as you were, to the wider community. So I'm very interested in that. I'm interested in how those relations between family members, fathers and mothers and children and so on, and how that works and how people cope with that, how they engage and negotiate.
You've lived most of your life in exile. How does that reflect on your literature? Here in Mexico, we've had also writers who've written in exile. I myself come from a Spanish Civil War refugee family. But how does it affect your literature? And the fact that you actually wrote in a different language, not your mother tongue.
I don't use the word exile about my condition, if you like, because I see exile as describing a political or principled decision, that somebody who moves from their country or one country to another because they occupy a political position which is not possible where they are. They might be in danger or something like that. Or in my case, it was an attempt to really study, to fulfill myself, to do something useful with my life.
You were 18 when you arrived in Great Britain?
I was 18 and not very intelligent or skilled or anything like that, just reckless.
Okay.
When you're 18, I think things are not really properly thought through, and you think, this is what I want to do. And what I wanted to do was not possible where I was then. It was a difficult time.
Did you already have the idea of becoming a writer? Did you want to write for a living?
No. No, it had never occurred to me. I mean, I loved writing all the time, or throughout, from childhood onwards. I loved writing, but it was never thought that it would be a career. I think partly because I didn't have anybody around me who was doing it as a career. Most of the people who were doing any kind of writing were also doing other things, perhaps a teacher or somebody who works in a bank and writes poetry or that kind of thing. So the idea of being a writer as any kind of career was not even on the horizon.
Tell me about Paradise. How did you think about the book? How did it come about, and how did you get it published?
Well, it was my fourth book.
Oh, it was your fourth book. I was under the impression that it was the first one.
No. It was
your fourth book.
So that made it a little easier.
Yeah.
Because the first book, I think, is sometimes very hard to
It
get
is
published.
usually the toughest one.
Yeah.
What was your first book then, and how difficult was it to publish it?
The title in English is Memory of Departure. And I started writing it, I think, in my early 20s. And it wasn't published until I was about 37 or something like that. So it took a very long time, something like 12 years or so.
Memory of Departure. Was it a book about exile?
It was a book about, I suppose, about leaving.
Okay.
It wasn't a book about me, not in any precise sense. Of course, it would use part of my experience, but it wasn't like a memoir-type novel or anything like that. But one of the things that I was having to sort out for myself to understand was not only the experience of arriving in another country with very little knowledge about that country, in other words, arriving as a stranger. It was also to try and work out what I had left behind. So it wasn't just sort of one process of making, kind of a learning about England. It was also about, in a way, disentangling what I knew about where I'd left and trying to understand things about that, which I think is probably the kind of negotiation that people who are displaced have to do on the whole. They don't just go and forget. They go wherever they go, and they're still working things out that are left behind, perhaps for the rest of their lives.
One, as a reader, always has the idea that even though a writer might not be writing an autobiographical novel, there's always something. So if I read about Yusuf in Paradise or Rashid in Desertion, I always think, well, there might be something of the author here.
Sure, yeah, there might be something, but it's not necessarily a kind of complete autobiographical, whatever.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But writing, I mean, when I first started writing, and in fact, the very first interview, this kind of thing, people say, how autobiographical is this? And he said, no, it's not. Can protest fiercely. I think the reason for protesting fiercely is to say, no, this is not unmediated. This is not just me.
Yes.
This is something I have shaped, organized, thought about, and so on. In other words, this is a work of art, if you like. But for sure, much of the kind of writing I do, much of it is based on experience. But the experience is not necessarily mine. Some of it is mine, some of it is other people's who speak about it, some of it's through reading, and of course the rest of it is imagination.
Well, Rashid, in El Desertor, in Desertion, Rashid says at one point, in fact, at the beginning of the novel, that this is not a story about me. It is a story about us. Are your novels a story about us, about the diversity of people who lived in East Africa at the time when you were young, or maybe are you telling us something about a community in particular?
Yes. What Rashid is saying, though, he's saying that this is a story about us in the sense of those people that are involved in the particular drama.
I mean,
his brother, his parents, his own life in England. But I guess, as a metaphor, yes, these stories are not, they're not just about East Africa even. They're really about how we negotiate life, wherever we are, I hope.
Does the life of a writer change abysmally when he gets the Nobel Prize?
Well, I guess you got to ask different writers, because I'm sure they all have different responses.
I've asked them. I've asked some of them.
Well, it isn't so much the life the life of the mind, shall we say, or even how you relate to your loved ones and people who are near to you. It isn't that changes. What changes, I think, well, several things. First of all, of course, it's a great pleasure and a great thing to have your work recognized.
It's a recognition, worldwide recognition.
Well, sure. But it's a wonderful thing to happen to a writer. And then the other thing is that you find new readers all over the place. So that's new languages, new translations. All of that is brilliant. It's wonderful. It's exactly what a writer would want. It does mean you then have to go and meet your readers.
Yes, you have to travel a lot.
And do what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And that takes time. So I guess what has changed most of all is the amount of time that's available to me to write or to do other things.
I like your novels. I like the plot of your novels. But I must admit, as a reader, that I was totally delighted with the richness of the language, the way you build your sentences. How quick or slow are you in building those sentences? Because I have to say that I was quite enamored of the building of your sentence, how you build each one of them. How do you do that? And how do you write? How do you give that richness to the language that you use?
Well, it's very nice of you to say that. Yeah. Well, I guess this is the method, or the way, the technique, the writing, the way I have found over the years. That's how I write. So it isn't anything it isn't kind of like deliberately I'm building a sentence. I hear sentences, and I wait till I hear that the balance of it is right, and then that's it. Move on to the next one.
Do you do a lot of rewriting?
No. I mean, of course, I do revision because maybe the emphasis isn't quite right here or something like that. But I work probably slowly. I mean, I don't leave a day's work until I'm satisfied with it. I don't leave it and say, I'll do it tomorrow. I make sure, well, sometimes I have to leave it because there isn't enough time in the day. But I don't move on until I'm satisfied that what's there is in good shape.
Was there one point in your life when you actually said, okay, this is it, I'm going to be a writer? You know, might teach at the same time to make a living or whatever, be a bank teller. You weren't a bank teller, but there was a point in life when you said, I am a writer, I'm going to be a writer, and I don't care.
Well, the way it started for me is that this idea of being a writer is that it happened more or less around about the same time as I was thinking I'm going to be an academic.
Okay.
So these two ambitions, as it were, kind of came together. But I didn't tell anybody that I had aspirations to being a writer because it seemed too big an aspiration. And so like some writers are kind of those secretly writing rather than saying, I'm a writer before I had anything to show anybody. So I think it took until I felt I had something that I was able to send to a publisher that I could even kind of softly mention to somebody that I think I want to be a writer. It took a while. And it took a while to say that with total conviction. Even having a book published is not the same thing as saying I'm a writer. So it took a while to be able to say, somebody said, what do you do? I said, well, actually, I'm a writer. You know, it takes a while to be able to say that with confidence.
Well, I do want to thank you, Abdulrazak Gurnah. I hope to have pronounced your name correctly.
Perfectly, thank you.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
Yes.
Y a usted, amigo, que al vernos y escucharnos hace posible este programa, se lo agradezco también. Esto es todo por hoy, pero no se lo olvide. Nos vemos la próxima.